Hi, everyone, and welcome to part two of the CFDA's Professional Development Series in recognition of Women's History Month. Our series celebrates the talented professionals that make up the fashion industry. With over 80% of fashion workforce comprised of women, we identified 3 inspiring female talents from various different disciplines who honor the craft and artisanship of design and who support and uplift the work of other women. Joining us today is Calli Roche, who is the owner and head pattern maker of Fugitive Patterns. Fugitive Patterns was founded in 2020 and serves a wide range of designers from emerging to established and contemporary to luxury. Calli has a diploma in freehand pattern cutting from the Training and Productivity Authority of Fiji, a certificate in couture techniques from Paris American Academy, and a bachelor's of science in apparel design and manufacturing. She's worked in New York City as a pattern maker for the last 10 years and was trained by the pattern makers at the Nicola Kaido studio. As a pattern maker and textile art fabricator, she works to make tangible the ideations of the cloth creatives in her orbit. Vacillating between CAD programs and traditional draping techniques, she often finds herself immersed in and obsessing over the geometry of the human body and its relationship to fabric, the self, and society. So, Calli, thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
So I'd like to start off with a bit of your history and learn more about how your upbringing influenced your path to choose pattern making as a profession.
Yes, so I am fundamentally a maker. I love to make things with my hands. People in my family all are makers. And so I think it's common when you are a creative, when you're trying to build your skill set, to start with what you have. And what I had was access to a sewing machine. So I've been sewing since I was very young. Went to fashion design school and realized that pattern making was a really fun and challenging way for me to kind of like combine my creative with my technical skills and kind of merge it all together and continue to make things with my hands. So that's kind of what led me into pattern making.
I love it. So, I mean, historically, women have been responsible for clothing their families. As you probably know, they were sourcing fabrics, pattern makers, cutters, sewing of the garments. They did it all. And even today, professionally, women dominate this field of pattern making. So what communities of women do you look to historically and or present for inspiration or energy in your practice?
For me, I talk about this a lot, and it's this sort of appreciation of craft. And I think historically, probably because it's primarily women, it's been a little bit undervalued, especially in comparison to like the fine art industry, which oftentimes pulls from crafters and makers. And for me, I really look to, my lineage a lot. My great grandfather sold Singer sewing machines in the Caribbean. My great aunt was a dressmaker and a tailor in the Bronx. I have an uncle, Dr. Baggs, who makes costumes for the Birmingham Carnival in England. So I really look to those people in my personal lineage, but also in general, specifically Black women, queer people who don't always have access to resources or the connections to kind of like really explore their creativity, and oftentimes, I don't want to say resort to, but like choose something that is financially sustainable, choose something that can support their families and themselves. And that's oftentimes clothing and sewing. And so I draw a lot of inspiration from the people who have maybe not always had the choice. I have the privilege of making the choice and like kind of pushing those boundaries even further of what it means to both support yourself, support your community, and be a part of like a really influential industry on the global scale. So I, to me, I really love being a part of the industry. I love building community with all types of women and men, and kind of that exchange of creative ideas, skill sets, and I mean, again, when I grow up, I want to be able to learn to make anything. So that's something that like historically people have done. You figure out how to make whatever you want.
Well, speaking of skills, you offer an incredibly essential skill for our industry. And the work that you do may sometimes be overshadowed by these more glamorous roles of being a designer. So, which is why there might be fewer avenues to pursue pattern making professionally. It was obviously very interesting to read your bio and see your credentials, because those kind of avenues are not as often well known. So what would you say to the next generation of creative professionals who are interested in a career in fashion?
The first thing is, I think aside from maybe Fashion Week and a few parties, even being a designer is not that glamorous. And it's a lot of hard work, and essentially you are in production, which in the United States is not, we don't have a lot of making industry. So specifically people who produce in New York, I think you kind of have a little bit of a privilege to like really be a part of a manufacturing industry. And I think for me, there are like maybe three things that I would say to young people, regardless of whether you're pursuing a degree, if you're switching careers, or trying to just get an understanding of the industry. The first is to build a community of generous people. And you can't learn everything in school. And so being humble and asking stupid questions and finding people who are willing to answer them, I think is key, and being kind. I also think that in my experience, the designers that create a product that sells and fits well, and oftentimes is like efficient in their development process, are people who have an understanding of all the different skills that it takes to produce a really good product. So designers who know how to sew, designers who maybe they're not excellent pattern makers, but have an understanding of fit, to me is such an asset. And there's only so much you can learn at school, and there's only so much you can learn on the job. So really pursuing your own personal development and skill set is key. Like, learn a 3D software, learn how to sew, the basics, even if it's just, I always encourage people to go shopping, turn things inside out, learn how things are made. And so kind of like consistently building your own skill set, really, to me, is what I would encourage anybody who's interested in creativity. And the third thing I would say is don't quit and don't accept abuse. And so I think, it's a really long journey. I'm consistently learning. You're always going to be learning. So to keep going and to continue to learn and continue to grow. And I think everybody that I've come into contact with, whether they're an intern, an assistant, a factory owner, a sample room manager, they all have something to teach you. And consistently being willing to learn, to show up, and to not feel discouraged by what can oftentimes be really, really hard work, to me, is kind of my encouragement to anybody who's interested.
Those are incredibly helpful pieces of advice. I hope everyone who's listening is taking serious notes right now. So let's get deeper into Women's History Month. What does this month mean to you?
Um, I think I would say Women's History Month I appreciate because there's like really cool content on the internet. But there's great graphics, we can repost, you learn some
Yes.
history. I love that. But also, I think femininity in general, and if you, I mean, maybe this is a little bit outside the scope of our conversation, but I think that the sort of like break between the feminine and the masculine is really detrimental to society in people kind of like embracing the binary and not keeping in touch with like their feminine side, emotionality, or like emotional maturity. And one of the things that I really love about Women's History Month, about sort of where we are as women, as feminists, is that we're expanding what it means to be feminine and to be a woman. And the like increased inclusion of trans women, of women of different sizes and shapes, to me is like really exciting, specifically when it comes to fashion. But I think that fashion has always had a ripple effect when it comes to whether it's a ripple effect or it's a reflection of society. I think that Women's History Month is a really cool opportunity to learn about the different people who are doing different things and maybe not receiving recognition, and also sort of like pushing the boundaries of, specifically in fashion, who we consider a woman, who our target markets are, who we're trying to cater to and sell to. You know, I've had the really cool opportunity of working with some designers who are creating gender neutral clothing lines. I've had the opportunity to work on a few like extended size lines, and the efforts that certain brands are taking to cater to a different woman, I think is really crucial to pushing our industry forward and kind of connecting all these different issues, whether it be inclusivity or racism, misogyny, environmental sustainability. I really appreciate what women are doing to push those things forward, specifically Black women, queer women, and trans women. And I think that during Women's History Month, I mean, I use it as an opportunity to learn and watch the reels and read the articles and go on my like my Wikipedia deep dives, which is, I said this before, but I call Wikipedia my like TikTok of research. So I love the emphasis for the express purpose of education and kind of like invigoration. I don't necessarily expect to change the world in my lifetime, but watching other people who aren't giving up and who are continuing to push forward, even as like progress is slow, and kind of taking Women's History Month as an opportunity to learn about those people and get a little bit of like hope and encouragement and some motivation, I think is really important.
We're psyched that our audience gets to learn more about you through this interview. You did allude to several members of your family influencing this chosen path of yours professionally, but were there any women in the fashion industry who were pivotal in helping you along your journey?
Yes, I think that I can tie it back to what I said earlier. The first is finding generous people. And I have had the really unique privilege of working with some highly trained, highly skilled people who were generous. At the Nicola Kaito studio, I was trained by a pattern maker, Shua He, who came from Balenciaga and is currently at Louis Vuitton. And one of the things she told me is, nothing is a secret. If you ask me a question, it's like asking me the time. I'm going to tell you if I know it. And I think that that is something, oftentimes information, resources are gate kept. And I don't want to tell you who my sample room is because you'll get on their schedule, or I don't want to share, which pattern maker I'm working with in case they get too busy for me. And so finding people who are willing to tell you what they know is so crucial. Another woman that I worked with this past, Brunet, who worked for Chanel and a bunch of different really high fashion brands. And she is one of the most talented, like, sample sewers, couturiers that I know. And she would critique patterns. She would explain to me why things didn't work. She would take time out to show me how to cut things correctly, how to even certain like pattern adjustments that I would make. She offered her insight and input. And even now, I haven't seen them in years. I still will send them a WhatsApp and be like, I gotta figure out how to do this. Can you help me? And they're still so helpful to me. The first woman that I'm just gonna go on like a long rant on all the wonderful women that I've had the chance to interact with. My first teacher was a woman named Savitri Rai at the Training and Productivity, I don't remember, Authority of Fiji. She worked in Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji in manufacturing, and was very, very key to a lot of different, she designed the airline uniforms and all these sorts of things. And one of the courses she taught people how to freehand cut, which is a sort of more accessible, bespoke tradition where, I grew up in Fiji. We don't have access to yards and yards of paper, or, it's too expensive to cut a muslin. So I learned, my first pattern making class, I learned how to draft the pattern directly onto the fabric and turn that into a garment. And she was super, super encouraging to me, and was very critical and taught me a lot about precision and being detail oriented, even as you do something that is relatively organic. And so that, I think, coming from that, and then learning the technical side, and then learning all of the different rules for pattern making, gave me sort of a like a rule breaking spirit of like, there's a more creative way of doing this. There's a cheaper way of doing this, or a faster way of doing this. And I have a very short attention span, so I'm always going to try and find the fastest way to do this. So she really taught me how to like work smarter and not harder. And then, every job I've had women who were so helpful and continue to help me to this day. I worked with some pattern makers when I worked at Parker, New York. There's Mariam Mohammed, Jess Morris, Lucia Stevens, Tatiana Raftis, who that sort of idea of gatekeeping was never a part of our work experience, where we're consistently sharing, Jess can make a blouse with her eyes closed. So I'm not going to stress about it if I could just ask her about it, And so working with all those women, I feel like really taught me a lot. And I think even some of the really, really toxic and abusive people that I've worked with in the industry taught me a lot about respect. They taught me about like my own boundaries and sort of how to treat myself well, how to treat others well. And, you don't need to send an email in 42-point bold red font with curse words at the end to get your point across. And that's not great business. So I think all of the people that I've worked with, I've learned something from, whether it's I'm learning from their mistakes, or learning from my own, or even just sort of learning how to interact with people.
I'm sure a lot of people are also learning from you now. And I think our professional journeys never end. We never just stop learning. And I think that's what's exciting about them, is we're always learning from others. And then hopefully, as you said, not gatekeeping and then sharing that knowledge. So how are you empowering other female creatives and professionals?
When I was in college, I had a few professors who said, you should teach. And I was like, no, never. No, thanks. Don't want to do that. But I find that I'm such a pattern nerd that if you ask me about it, I'm like, all right, let's get into it. Let's talk about pant rises for the next 30 minutes until your eyes gloss over. And so I think, I teach a workshop once a semester at the FIT Fashion Business Essentials course. And I go through, this is the different types of patterns. Here's how to find a good pattern maker. Here's all the things that you need to know to work successfully with a pattern maker, whether it's here or abroad. And so that's one way. And I've met some really, really cool women through that course. I offer a shameless plug, 1-hour consultations where I'm happy to go over someone's sketches and talk through their details and, where's your zipper and there's no darts, and let's really get into it and share whatever knowledge I have. I really think that any industry benefits from having the most diverse group of people in it. And so I'm really excited to talk to young people. I think that, what the 20-year-olds are thinking about, I'm super interested in. So if I can share with, someone who's just graduating, here's how you balance a pant side seam. And they're telling me, oh, we're not doing straight side seams anymore. I feel like there's this consistent transfer of information that is really, really exciting to me. One of my hopes and goals for Fugitive Patterns is to develop a sort of apprenticeship program, because, internships are very short, and specifically when it comes to pattern making and more technical side, it really takes a long time to learn. And, not everybody can afford to work for free for 3 months. And so my hope is to invest in people who maybe don't have access to internships, don't have intern coordinators or connections in really luxury or even contemporary brands. And so, I've worked with a few young people to just sort of share my skills, and what Schwa and Pascaline do for me, I'm happy to do for somebody else. I get texts from people who are like, my shoulder seam is looking funky. Do you have any suggestions? And, I'm on my couch watching TV. I'm like, well, you could just adjust the slope. And so that's, again, I've always been taught, skills and information that gatekeeping that or keeping that to yourself doesn't benefit you, and it doesn't benefit our industry. So I'm an open book,
We'll make sure to link your information below in our article. So if anyone needs your professional services, they can get your contact information below. And my last question for you is, how would you encourage fashion brands to make an investment in the advancement of women in the fashion industry?
That's a very loaded question. I think one of my first suggestions, and something that I've really had to do, is to take stock of my capacity. I cannot fix everything, but I know what I can do. And so to kind of pick your issue, pick your, what's really important to you, and focus on that. There are some brands who they're like, I want to do 00 to 32. And I'm like, well, maybe if you already know how to fit plus size women, you should build a brand that's just for them, and really, really focus on getting that market like really creating a quality product for that group of people. And so I think sort of like concentrating on an issue that's really important to you and working on that is something that I would encourage people to do. The other thing that I would really encourage brands to do that I think is super, super basic is, and you know, it's not easy, but I think if you can't do it, you shouldn't be in business, and that's paying people well. And, you know, pay your interns after their 3 months is up. Like, these people are helping you create a brand. You're nowhere without your factories. You're nowhere without your tech designers. And I think, especially in New York City, it's very, very expensive to run a brand, but investing in the people that you work with, I think, is so beneficial. Paying your factories well, both here and finding factories abroad who pay their people well, I think is really, really important. And when it comes to the world, another thing that I would encourage people to do is to honestly make fewer, better things. There's too much clothing out there. And, you know, I'm not trying to put myself out of business, but making a really beautiful or quality product, paying attention to where you're sourcing things from and the impact that those things have on the world and on your community, I think is it's key. Slowing down.
Mm. Those are beautiful. Those are beautiful responses. I really appreciate all your insights and your generosity yourself of sharing these experiences, your history, what you're doing now to encourage other women. And thank you, Calli, so much for being a part of this really special series we're doing at the CFDA. And again, if anyone wants to connect with Calli for consulting services, her information is below. And thank you so much for joining us today, Calli.
Thank you.